Today, I think we need some perspective before we talk about AMD's RDNA 3 announcements that happened today. And we do need to talk about them because there were a lot of announcements, and I do feel like what was announced today may be underestimated by a lot of people and how important these things could become for the PC gaming market. But before we talk about them, in preparation for this video, I actually went back and looked at reviews and articles and the launches of mid-range RDNA 2 products from a couple of years ago to gain perspective on how I think this market has developed over the past couple of years. And the first thing that immediately jumped out at me as I looked back at reviews was that it was not that commonplace yet for most reviewers to speculate on street pricing and actual availability to make a comprehensive review for a product. You see, this thing we take for granted now, which is not mindlessly taking the MSRPs these companies feed us and blindly believing they're doing their best or always in our best interests. In fact, as I went back and looked at old RDNA 2 graphics card reviews, I was reminded of how often back then I felt like I was one of the only people trying to put out nuanced opinions about graphics cards like the RX 6600 XT, where I openly acknowledged that they definitely were not priced how I wanted them to be priced, but that if we're going to evaluate if you should buy this card relative, that's an important word here, relative to the competition, you had to accept reality, accept that maybe this card's pricing, though higher than what you want, is actually a lot lower than the competition's. And, there were a lot of reviewers back then that acted like the RTX 3060 actually was a $330 graphics card, even though, from my perspective, you'd have to be a brain-dead zombie to act like that was ever the case back then. In fact, if you actually look it up right now, the 3060 hasn't hit or gone below MSRP on average until just a few months ago. And indeed, now that card that was never really at MSRP for years is below MSRP, it's easy to also notice how so many other cards are wildly cheaper than they used to be. And if I am being entirely honest, what I was really digging for this morning in preparation for watching the AMD announcements and stuff was trying to find some good comprehensive lists of what graphics cards used to cost exactly 2 years ago. And while I didn't find exactly what I wanted quickly enough, maybe I'm just lazy and I apologize if I am, I did find something that I think is more than enough to give everybody watching this video some perspective before we evaluate the RX 7800 XT. So now I'm going to put this on screen here. I couldn't find in the Wayback Machine the GPU Amazon bestsellers list from the month I wanted, but I did find one from just 1.5 years ago. So not even 2021, but early 2022. And, well, look at this thing. Let it sink in for a second, people. The supposedly $330 3060 was in fact selling for 50% more than the RX 6600 that everybody said should have had a lower MSRP. And the 3080 was selling for, well, about the price of a 4090 right now. And the 3070 Ti, that was selling for nearly double the 7800 XT MSRP. And the 6700 XT was selling for nearly double the 7700 XT MSRP that was announced today by AMD at Gamescom. And look, the first thing I will say about these products after putting them in perspective to how far we've come in just, 1.5 years, is that I guess the 7700 XT is named okay. I mean, look, it's going from 40 RDNA 2 compute units to 54 RDNA 3 compute units. That's definitely going to be a solid generational uplift, but the 7800 XT's name, the name is pure stupidity. This card, the 7800 XT, that is launching for a lower MSRP than the 6800 did, and actually a lower MSRP than the 6750 did, really should be called the RX 7800. No XT necessary. And for that matter, the 7900 GRE should also be called the 7800 XT. Even if it was only officially going to be released in a few regions that didn't include the US outside of system integrators, I still just think calling it the 7800 XT and stating it won't be available everywhere, and then calling what they announced today the 7800, that would that would really only benefit AMD, because now what's going to happen in reviews is AMD is going to have their 7800 XT compared to the 6800 XT when it really should be compared to the 6800. They're only hurting themselves by doing this, but at the end of the day, I guess only pricing and performance is what matters. They could call it the Golden Turd Edition if they wanted to, but if it was a good card, I would still recommend it as long as it wasn't painted brown. And so if we pull up the numbers for performance, well, this chart kind of makes it look like AMD is winning here by a crazy amount compared to the 4070. But when I averaged these, I found that AMD was only winning by around 3.5%. So almost just a tie. Although it is notable that AMD is winning on average, even when they enable ray tracing in a bunch of games. So overall, I actually think this is a pretty good showing for a card that, well, it might have a stupid name, is going to be priced 20% lower than its competition, while also having 33% more VRAM. And while the 7800 XT won't have any more VRAM than the 6800 XT, and many people will point out, oh, that card's already so cheap, so this is stupid, I have to point out that most of the time here, the 6800 XT has been a bit above $500. Yes, sometimes you can get lucky, even right now, and get one for around $500 or slightly lower. But that's not the average price. If you go online and look, the average price is still above the MSRP that the 7800 XT is set at. And it's a very welcome sign to see this happen, because what that tells us is when Navi 21 sells out, when cards like the RX 6800 and 6950 XT are no longer available, and I'm told that should be a reality very soon, AMD isn't going to have their replacement be $600. It's going to be $500, and it's going to be more efficient, and you're not going to have to get the stupid 4060 Ti 16GB if you want a decent 16GB card for $500. When the 6800 XT is gone, the 7800 XT will be here, a little cheaper, a little better, and a welcome spurring of competition to the mid-range. But that's not really what I think about the other card AMD announced today. And I want to talk about the 7700 XT and FSR 3 and actually leak availability info for these products releasing in just over a week from now. But first, an ad from a sponsor. This piece of content is brought to you by FlexiSpot and their roster of high-quality adjustable standing desks. As many of you know, I'm currently moving into a new house with a new studio, and so is Dan, actually. He'll be joining me in the new house for a bit after finishing up with grad school, and while he's here, he'll be using a FlexiSpot desk yet again. That's right, again. Dan, of course, was already using a FlexiSpot desk up in Massachusetts for the past year, and we were ecstatic then to work with them again when they contacted us because, well, they make great desks, and Dan has nothing but good things to say about them after all of this time. FlexiSpot desks truly are made with high-quality bamboo that allow for incredible weight support and durability against all types of would-be destroyers. They come with an advanced one-touch LED control panel with 3 programmable buttons for different height levels, and you can customize your desk with preferred colors and sizes of said desk and even desk frame. And they even now have matching accessories to go along with these desks, like pencil holders and a smartphone holder that I actually use to watch YouTube videos while I'm working. And FlexiSpots also come with an incredible set of warranties, and in fact, they're having an anniversary sale from August 21st to August 28th with products up to 50% off, and you can support the channel by using code BrokenSilicon for another 10% off orders above $500. Clicking the links in the description helps support Moore's Law is Dead a lot, and these are very high quality products that we really do swear by, so check out FlexiSpot desks today. So, the RX 7700 XT. You know, I actually have to bring something up. A contact of mine said something to me in passing just a few weeks ago. This person mused that they had heard AMD might price the 7800 XT and 7700 XT within $50 of each other. And me and my contacts laughed and said, nah, there's no way they would repeat the pricing mistake of the 7900 XT, right? That must have just been something considered. They wouldn't do that, right? Well, apparently the answer is yes. AMD is actually pricing these cards in a way that's so stupid, I refuse to believe it and leak it, but they're doing it. Apparently they hope second time's the charm. The 7700 XT and 7800 XT are priced as close to each other as the 7900 XT and 7900 XTX were last year. And, well, I guess I don't want to spend too much more time on this card because I don't really like it that much right now. But I will say the only reason AMD would be doing this is, well, really for two reasons. Number one, because Navi 32 really does cost more to make than Navi 22, but also it's priced relative to the competition. And I think we have to accept that NVIDIA's chief competition to Navi 32, to the 7700 XT, that is using over 340 millimeters squared of silicon, is a card that has less than 190 millimeters squared of silicon. In fact, it's so wildly overpriced, the 4060 Ti, that the 7700 XT actually has more 5 nanometer silicon than the 4060 Ti does before we even consider those 6 nanometer memory chiplets next to it. And make no mistake about it, as silly as the 7700 XT looks relative to the 7800 XT, it is going to be 10 to 20% better than the 4060 Ti and 1440p, often even with ray tracing on, apparently. And I'm actually confident that if you ever do a comparison between that 12 and that 8 gigabyte card in just 4K rasterization, it's going to turn into an absolute bloodbath. The fact is that the 7700 XT, it really only looks questionable compared to other Radeon products, which it's funny to think about that because it's starting to feel like we are getting into a situation where NVIDIA is seemingly competing with themselves in the enthusiast market, ignoring AMD when they price things, and then AMD, their price performance is so much better than NVIDIA that they are actually competing with themselves in the mid-range between their current and last gen. And the cost to make the 7700 XT alone means that they just think it would be silly to price it any lower, whether you agree or not. But yeah, just to be clear about my opinion on this, the pricing of the 7700 XT compared to the 7800 XT is silly. Based on the specs, I would have estimated before today that the difference will be 21 to 26%. But AMD's own numbers, in fact, show shamelessly that the 7800 XT, that only costs 11% more than the 7700 XT, is going to be around 22% faster. So the only actual reason I could even come up with why they would think that makes any sense, like, because if it were me, I would have priced the 7800 XT at like $509 and the 7700 XT at $430, just to have that kind of 20% pricing differential. The only reason I could see them thinking this makes any sense is if they are thinking about the people that either game in 1080p 360 hertz or like 1440p 240 with medium settings. Because if you do, the compute difference between these cards is actually minimal. I could see some situations in lower res games or games in 1440p with settings turned down for high frame rates where the performance difference isn't actually that big. But that's the only thing I can come up with, and I think the 7700 XT is probably doomed to get mediocre or bad reviews, because I don't think other reviewers will be saying those kind things about it. And AMD, I don't know, you're doing it to yourselves again. And for those that would bring up the RX 6800 relative to the 7700 XT, honestly, they should both have similar raster, but the 7700 XT will have better ray tracing, slightly lower power, and I do actually think that RX 6800 stock is dwindling. So long term, it's kind of like a side grade in price performance for the market, right? The 6800 right now is about $450. The 7700 is going to be $450, and well, the new one will have less RAM but better ray tracing and efficiency. So I don't really see that as making things better either way, but that card, the 6800, was already pretty cheap. And I guess what I'm saying, though, is if you want to trade ray tracing performance and efficiency for having 16 gigabytes of VRAM, buy the 6800 now, because that thing will not be widely supplied around 450 for much longer. But all right, I'm starting to talk about supply. I think that means I should just get to the new information I actually want to leak today about if you will be able to buy these Navi 32 products easily when they come out. So let's put these quotes on screen from a handful of my sources that say pretty promising things, actually. Source number one, someone who works at AMD, tells me that they have had Navi 32 stockpiled for months now, while they wait for RDNA 2 supply to sell through before releasing the next generation of mid-range products, and that people shouldn't worry at all. You're going to be able to buy them. This person actually started laughing when I talked to them. Now, the second source tells me that it's still early, but from what they're hearing from AMD's AIB partners, there are indications that there's going to be a ton of Navi 32 supply at launch, and this person was really excited about it because this person working at a major retailer says the last few GPU launches have sucked, and they are really hoping to have a good seller soon, and they think at least the 7800 XT will be a hot seller. It will be a little cheaper than the 6800 XT that's already been selling pretty well, be better efficiency, have better ray tracing, and come with Starfield. They expect the thing to sell well. And even if it does sell well, though, a third source, someone who's in distribution who works with AMD, tells me that even if these things fly off the shelves, at least for a few days, there should still be an ample supply of MSRP models. There really are that many cards. But getting to an interesting quote here with source number 4, this person tells me that they don't have an exact percentage breakdown, but that to them, it's starting to sound like the 7800 XT and 7700 XT will have a similar proportion of supply. So, in other words, they're not going to be like a metric ton difference in how many are available. There's going to be a similar amount, relatively speaking, in magnitude terms of each other. So, maybe one of them will be 60% of the supply, maybe up to like 65 or 70%, but it's not like one of them is going to have like 4-to-1 ratios. In other words, while the 7700 XT looks significantly worse than the 7800 XT, there's going to be a lot of both of them. The 7700 XT isn't priced the way it is to make the 7800 XT look good. That's just the decision AMD came to. And apparently, though, it isn't aggressive enough of a decision to make AMD's competitor respond. I already leaked earlier this week that the 4060 Ti 16GB was likely to get a de facto price drop around when these cards come out. And if I put the quotes back on screen, someone that I talked to at NVIDIA tells me that after seeing the pricing on the 7700 XT and the 7800 XT, that they are going to indeed adjust channel pricing, not the official MSRP, but adjust the pricing partners pay to get these bomb kits so that they can more easily sell them for a lower price. And it actually does sound like the 4060 Ti 16GB may soon be findable close to the MSRP of the 7700 XT, and that they definitely think this is aggressive enough to make the 7700 XT not a real threat. They remember the 3060 12GB selling for 50% or twice as much as 6600 XTs, and they think this might happen all over again. They're like, it'll have the same amount of RAM as the 7800 XT, and it will definitely be a lot weaker. Well, they'll probably just buy it because it says NVIDIA, and it will be a bit weaker than the 7700 XT, but it'll have more RAM than the 7700 XT. So just take note, if you do like the 4060 Ti for some reason, that is going to get closer to 7700 XT pricing very soon. And I do have to admit that whether I think it's fair or not, it is my opinion that if the 4060 Ti 16GB gets close to $450, AMD's partners will be forced to respond and have the 7700 XT slowly drift in price down towards $400. So that is something anyone considering getting the cheapest Navi 32 variant should keep in the back of their head here. I think the 7800 XT is going to sell all right at $500 and will probably stay close to its MSRP over the holiday season. But the 7700 XT, I don't think it's going to get great reviews, and NVIDIA is going to respond with slight de facto price cuts on the 4060 Ti 16GB. And I do think AMD's partners will unfortunately have to respond and push that thing closer to $400. So $50 matters a lot to you. I would definitely wait on getting the 7700 XT until it goes down in price a little bit here. All right, now I'm done talking about graphics cards. Let's shift gears to FSR. Well, it seems that many YouTube channels took the lull in news to obsess over drama. This channel was busy exclusively leaking that FSR 3 would be launching very soon. Although there were caveats, it seemed like while there could be a teaser or small overview at Gamescom, the overall technology didn't quite seem ready immediately. And well, that leak has now proven to be correct today, and it was indeed an overview, But yes, an early overview. It wasn't an announcement that tomorrow 100 games are going to get FSR 3, and some of the major and really the most major features, in my opinion, really probably won't be ready until Q1. But let's back up here and just start about what I think about FSR 3 overall. It's a little early, let's be honest about it. I'm going to want to wait and see third-party reviews of FSR 3, just like I wanted to see third-party reviews of DLSS 3 before I gave any firm opinions. But my early impression simply is that AMD will have another slight uplift in image quality with FSR 3, but that they are unlikely to come close to DLSS 3.5 image quality in all scenarios over the holiday season. That there's still going to be this image quality deficit with AMD, although it might get more support than DLSS 3.5 in the short term. That'll be an interesting thing to watch, and it does seem like it's getting some really good latency reductions as well. I'd be interesting to see if AMD leapfrogged NVIDIA slightly in that, although they're both really to pretty low latency at this point. But actually, surprisingly to me, it seems like their frame generation technology may be the star of the FSR 3 show so far. Indeed, when it comes to the frame generation tech in FSR 3, early impressions from people that have seen it in person at Gamescom are that it seems to work just as well as DLSS 3 in motion. And as long as a game specifically adds it in-game, then it even works with last-gen products, which is a really big deal. You're going to be able to use frame generation with FSR 3 as long as a developer adds it to the game if you have an RX 5000, 6000, or NVIDIA RTX 2000 or later graphics cards, and it's even going to come to consoles as well. In fact, the only thing that really disappoints me about FSR 3 frame generation technology, so far from what I can tell, is that it does seem like the in-driver, like RSR version that lets you force frame generation in any game seems like it will be limited to RDNA 3 GPUs for the time being, and that implementation won't be out until early next year. And I actually have to say that I hope AMD changes course on some of the decisions it seems to be planning for FSR frame generation support on various families of graphics cards, because I think there's a chance here they could be missing a massive opportunity to have a de facto win against NVIDIA in software, which they haven't had for a very long time and they sorely need right now. And to hit my point home, I'll put it this way. All right, let's say I want to go play Battlefield 2042 on my RTX 4090. Let me just hop into that right now and turn on frame gen. Oh, that's right. I can't turn on frame generation in Battlefield because NVIDIA doesn't have this ability to add it, and because the game doesn't directly support it. Well, whatever, I'll just get on Age of Empires 4 with Dan, and heck, that's an RTS game. Latency wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it does get bottlenecked in single-threaded. Oh, that's right, it doesn't have DLSS frame generation, so I guess I'm just fucked. Except, you know who isn't fucked? Dan, the co-host of Broken Silicon. He has a 7900 XTX, and he can play Age of Empires 4 with frame generation supposedly early next year, and it would be a major selling point if all AMD cards did, going back to the RX 5000 series, and if AMD worked with developers to ensure as many games as possible had FSR 3, so people with Pascal, Maxwell, Turing, Ampere could use a version of frame generation. Because if it is actually pretty close to the quality of DLSS 3 frame generation, which early reports seem to indicate it is, this is it. This is AMD's chance to say, hey, guess what? FSR 3 is the way to go. We're just as good at them with this new flashy feature, and it's supported in most games. And you know what? In fact, if you get an RDNA 3 or really any RDNA graphics card, even last gen ones, you can turn it on. It's not as high quality, but you can still turn it on in any DirectX 11 or DirectX 12 game. This could force DLSS 3 frame gen into irrelevance quickly, because it really isn't supported in that many games, in my opinion, yet. And it might even force NVIDIA to consider trying to port some version of it to Ampere, even if it didn't run as well. AMD, don't miss this opportunity. You've almost nailed it with this HYPR-RX one-click solution that can add frame gen to so many users. Make it as many users as possible, build it, and they will come. And I'm going to say it again. If AMD actually gets their own versions of frame generation, basically working in all games for RDNA 3 cards, and working to some degree for almost all cards, people may be sleeping on this being actually the biggest announcement AMD made today, and a day of a lot of announcements, and NVIDIA might have a major weakness here pretty soon. But you know what isn't weak? The independent reporting of this channel on Patreon. And I just want to say that within 24 hours, we will be dropping a Patreon exclusive die shrink discussing all these announcements in far more detail. And then we'll be live covering hot chips all weekend for people who join the Moore's Law Dead Discord through Patreon. We cannot do this without our patrons, and there's a massive, continually growing community of thousands of Moore's Law Dead patrons out there that I'm sure would love to talk to you about today's announcements in a respectful way if you join us for just $2 a month. That's all it is. It's not even a cup of coffee. It's like a can of tuna every month for you to get all this exclusive ad-free content. And additionally, thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. I want to thank them one more time as well. I actually have 2 of their desks now. I think they're very good. Check them out if you need a new desk. And to everybody else, at a minimum, thank you for watching.